Over the last weeks and months, a lot of B-roll videos have been posted on YouTube. These kind of videos are quite fun. Personally, I only need one special kind of B-roll for my channel, and that is B-roll of products. Since it could be similar for you, I would like to show you 3 different easy ways to shoot B-roll of products today. It's not about difficult and unusual camera movements, but rather about how you can quickly and easily present your products in a cinematic way. You will see that it is very easy and you don't need any expensive gear for it. For all the gear I use in this video, you will find links in the video description. If you buy through one of these links, the price remains the same for you, but I receive a small commission. This helps to keep this channel going, so thanks for that. And in case you're new here, my name is Werner, I live in the Italian Alps, and this channel is about filmmaking tutorials and reviews of consumer cameras. Consider subscribing if you're interested in these topics and have fun with this video. Today I will show you behind the scenes of all the 3 different shots and of course tell you the camera settings. I included all 3 shots in the intro sequence. Even if they didn't fit 100% together, I still wanted to show you 3 different possible shots. You will see in all 3 cases the light is crucial, and of course I chose a GoPro as product for this sequence. What else could it have been? Now let's take a look at the first shots. It's almost embarrassing to show you the light I used for these first shots. Actually, I only used this cheap RGB LED light strip. As you can see, you don't always have to have the most expensive equipment to make interesting shots. As a so-called light stand, I used the Joby GorillaPod. I put the light strip around the legs of the GorillaPod. The GoPro was placed in such a way that individual spots of light could not be reflected on the front screen of the lens. I used my Sony camera and the 35 1.8 as well as the Sigma 16mm 1.4. I mounted the camera on a tripod and placed it very close to the table. The goal was to get very close to the GoPro to capture specific details. Unfortunately, the 35mm lens from Sony doesn't have a very short minimum focusing distance. The 60mm from Sigma has a very good minimum focusing distance, but with 60mm it is of course relatively wide for such close-ups. For this reason, I used the clear image zoom to get closer to details like the GoPro label. The clear image zoom is a kind of digital zoom that most Sony cameras have. It allows you to zoom in up to 2 times, and unlike with a normal digital zoom, there is hardly any loss of image quality. As for the settings, I shot in 4K and 25 frames per second. 25 frames per second because I live in the PAL region. In the US, that would be 24 frames per second. I set the aperture to the smallest possible value, 1.8 or 1.4, partly because there was little light and partly to create a shallow depth of field. I set the shutter speed to 1/50th of a second, and with the ISO value, I adjusted exposure. Mostly the ISO value was set to 800. I simply shot in movie mode. A log profile leads in these low light conditions to more disadvantages than advantages. I used manual focus and the white balance was set to 5600 Kelvin. In order to add some slight camera movements, I simply turned the head of the tripod very slowly. As tripod I used the C5E from Rollei, which is a normal tripod without video fluid head. And that's it with this first shot. The results you see are straight out of camera and have not been color graded. The biggest difficulty was actually the handling of the cheap light strip. I understood that it is time to get a proper RGB light. Let's have a look at the second shot. Here we have a camera movement with a forward movement and a slight right turn. Let's look at the most important thing first, the lighting. In this case I used a proper video light with a softbox. I have been using the Godox SL60W for several months now. I can only recommend this light. It is relatively cheap and works perfectly. If you want to spend some more time with video production, in the long run the purchase of a proper video light is absolutely necessary. I used the light together with a softbox and a light stand from Newer. In this case I have lit the GoPro from the side from above, mounting the light relatively close above the table. The GoPro looks in the direction of the light source and is therefore well lit. To make the background a bit more attractive, I mounted my RGB light strip on the back of a chair. Additionally, I used another background light. The goal in this case was to get from the blurred area into the focus by moving the camera. It makes sense to set the focus manually for the close-up in advance. To create a smooth camera movement, I put the camera on a thick paper. Then I moved the underlay and not the camera itself. This way you can easily achieve smooth shots. Normally I would have filmed with 60 frames per second or even 120 frames per second. With the high frame rates you can create slow motion, which helps to stabilize the camera movement. But in this case, unfortunately, this was not possible. Depending on the light source, especially high frame rates can lead to unwanted flickering. This shot was taken with 60 frames per second. As you can see, there are unpleasant effects in the bokeh balls. For this reason, I also took this shot with 25 frames per second. Therefore, the movement had to be smooth. I used the Sony 35 1.8 again with clear image zoom and a shutter of 1/50th of a second. With the ISO value I adjusted exposure as before. The white balance was fixed at 5600 Kelvin again. As for the camera movement, you can basically do it forward or backward. This does not have any effect on the result, as you can reverse the clip in post. To get the focus correctly, a backward movement from the focus into the blur is probably even easier. I tried the movement a couple of times and chose the best clip at the end. By pure coincidence, this was a forward movement. Finally, I had to color grade the clip to make it at least as similar as possible to the first shots. Our last shot is probably the easiest of the three and at the same time the most professional. Again, the decisive factor is the lighting. It had to be a top-down shot. I put the GoPro on the same brown paper that I used for the camera movement. The paper has a light but interesting texture and is therefore very suitable as background. Remember, textures are very important for backgrounds. To make the shot a bit more interesting and also to better convey the size of my object, I added two more objects. In this case, a carabiner and a pine cone. For the lighting of the scene, I used again the Godox together with the softbox. In this case, I placed the light on the back of the table and mounted it as close as possible above the GoPro. The closer the light source, the softer the shadows will be, because the light source will be bigger. This way, the scene was perfectly lit. I've now placed the camera on the usual tripod at the front of the table. I have extended the back leg a bit. This way the tripod tilts forward a little bit more. This gives almost the impression that it is a real overhead shot. The camera settings were the same as in the other two shots. Only the aperture was set to a value of 3 this time. As lens I used the 35mm from Sony again. Also in this case I used the clear image zoom because I could not always get close enough to the GoPro. I set the focus manually and the rotation of the camera was done the same way as before by turning the tripod head. Once again, I graded the colors in post and added more blue tones to match the color grading of the other shots. Now I put all clips in the appropriate order on a timeline, selected the suitable song, added sound effects, stabilized the clips, added some transitions, and that's it with our intro. If the video was interesting for you, give me a like as feedback and see you next time.